Hey there, Neil McGee with the UVA School of Data Science. This is a quick little recap for, especially for system students in the BSDS program, but for anybody else, on how to run Airflow locally using Docker and Docker Compose, how to work with DAGs in that local setup, and then especially because we sometimes work with remote services in various cloud providers, I'm going to show you a specific example of how to use AWS credentials within a DAG. And just exactly how to set that up. So we have a repository here in the UVA SDS Systems organization in GitHub. It's called Run Airflow. If you clone this repository, and all the instructions are here for that, but you'll see there's a Docker file for building a custom Docker image. And the reason you'll want to build a custom image is because you can add all sorts of requirements into the requirements txt for other libraries that you might need to use within your DAGs. So it's nice that you can build your own Airflow images. Those images will be used in Docker Compose, and that'll spin up about 6 or 7 containers in a cluster running as an application. And that gives you this beautiful GUI, the Airflow GUI, and this is version 3.0.1, I think, which is current as of early fall 2025. So what you'll do is you'll cd into this directory, and then you run this one simple command, docker compose up -d, and D is in detached mode, so you're not stuck with the log output in your terminal, but you can always go look at it if you want. And then once that builds and runs, and it'll take a couple minutes the first time, and you'll see everything in a healthy state, then you can go to this URL. This is your localhost 127.0.0.1 on port 8080, and that's this web UI. So that's good. So here we are in that directory, and you can see, if I say docker ps, we can see all the containers that are running. And there is a worker, there's a scheduler, the API server, which is the web interface, the DAG processor, the triggerer, and then a database in the form of Postgres, and another cache database, key value database in the form of Redis. So these are all great. They're up and running, nice and clear. And if you look in the DAGs folder, this is where we can add our own custom DAGs. And so I've got like a hello, DAGs hello. And this takes the typical syntax. It has some Airflow imports. It has default arguments. It has a couple of default functions. And then it defines the DAG as an object of a DAG class here. And it gives it a name, hello world, and so on and so on. So that's fine. So if you have a DAG, or you're working on a DAG and kind of iterating on it, put it into that directory, into DAGs. And that's really the only directory you need to worry about for development in Airflow until you get much more sophisticated use cases. And then after about 30 seconds or a minute, you should see it appear as a DAG here. So here's hello world. You can see instances of the runtime. You could trigger another one from here. In fact, before I do that, let's say I've made some changes and I'd like to go ahead and make sure that Airflow has that current version. I could say, hey, reparse the DAG, read it again, ingest it again, and then I could trigger it. And I can trigger it manually. There it is, it's been submitted, and I can see the third run, and I can click on this little checkbox for this particular task within the newest run on the right, and I'll see the log output from that. So that's just like the basics of spinning up Airflow, putting the DAGs into the right directory, and watching them get parsed. If you have an error, let's say you're missing a comma or a quote mark, or your DAG is malformed in some way, you'll see a little box appear over here that says, cannot import one DAG. And you can actually click on that box, and it'll give you some detailed information that says, line 13, you're missing this flag, or this thing, I don't recognize this syntax, and so on. So that'll help you kind of debug your DAG in the first place. The next thing I want to go over, last thing really, is if we cd into DAGs, we'll see a DAG I was writing just kind of as a proof of concept called fetch SQS. So if we nano that, you'll see this is a DAG related to Data Project 2 for DS3022, but it's a common use case where I have a DAG and it needs to reach out to AWS and do something. Maybe it needs to talk to a private bucket and get a file. Maybe it needs to find out the state of some other information or some service within AWS, or talk to DynamoDB or whatever. How do we get those credentials into a DAG? And normally we would just inject environment variables, and we can sort of do that, but we need to do it in a special way in Airflow. So what do we do? You can see the normal Airflow imports here. I've got Bodo 3 ready to go. I define the DAG. I instantiate the DAG. I initialize it. And then I just have one function here, which is to fetch an SQS message. And you can see here I have the typical, I'm going to try using this URL of this queue in SQS. And I'm going to go ahead and get message attribute names, and I'm going to get one message at a time. I'm going to keep it invisible for 60 seconds. I'm going to wait 10 seconds for a message if it's not there. And then I'm just going to print out the response, just the JSON payload. And then I call it down at the bottom. The question is, well, how do I get my credentials here? And to do that, we need to do three things really. One is we need to import this special class from airflow.models, import the variable class. And this lets us consume variables from Airflow. So that's good. So that's the first thing, is we need to import the right thing. And then downstairs here, inside of our function itself, when we define the SQS client, that would normally be really short, SQS equals bodo3.client SQS. That's typically the way we do it. But we can actually pass specific credentials here within the client. So I'm going to pass in a region name. I'm going to pass in an AWS access key ID, and that is going to be an Airflow variable that I'm going to name this thing in all caps, AWS access key ID. And then the same thing for the secret access key. I'm going to name it here in lowercase, which is what Python is expecting. And I'm going to get the Airflow variable, which I'm going to keep in uppercase. So these two variables within Airflow are going to be how I consume this. Now, this isn't exactly how we would do it in production. We'd keep them encrypted, and we would use maybe a connection in Airflow, other fancy ways to talk to AWS. But this is going to suffice for local development. This will be all right, because we can always work with variables in different ways down the road. So how do we get these two variables? We go over back to the web UI. We go to admin. We go to variables. And here you'll see, here are my variables set up. And I could add a variable, and you can say AWS access key ID, and then you just paste it in here. And then the same thing with the secret key, and that'll keep that hidden away because it knows it's secret. So these are three, and I can turn encryption on here. These variables, and I've actually already passed the region in, so I don't even need the region. These two variables are what's going to get consumed here and here on my client configuration. With that in mind, then I can go back here to DAGs. I can see my fetch SQS, and you can see where I was debugging and getting this working. And let's just go ahead and reparse that DAG. And I can always go check the code if I wanted to here. And I can see, oh, does it see the latest version of my code? Is it updated, and so on? And then I can trigger it manually here. And that'll start an instance, and I can click on it and see, here it is. Here is my SQS message in its full entirety. And normally in the process of a DAG, I would parse that message and pull out particular values and work or do something with them. And then, especially with SQS, I would then want to delete that message after I've consumed it and done whatever I need to do with it. The last step would be I'd delete that message and get it out of the queue. Okay, hope this helps. I'll see you later.